Welcome to the Wander Mode podcast, where we celebrate the fearless spirit of women embracing life's wanderings. Where every story is a spark of inspiration and reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful moments happen when we simply embrace wherever the journey may lead. Today's conversation with Suzanne Campi was really special to me for a few reasons. One, you've heard me talk a lot on this podcast about where I am at in this midlife season. And the biggest change that I've experienced at this time in my life was the transition from teaching into entrepreneurship. And Suzanne and I really delved into how to honor our past selves, even though we're carrying a very different version of ourselves going forward. The second reason that this conversation was really special to me is I feel like sometimes we all get very lost in who we are at any given moment of time. We forget where we came from, and sometimes we don't even pay attention to where we're going. And yet this conversation with Suzanne was like talking with someone who is a kindred spirit, someone who just loves reflection as much as I do, but also loves preparation just like I do. And leaving teaching was definitely this aspect of my life that has required me to really honor who I was, prepare for who I am going to become, and then really honing in on where I want to be going forward and how it is that I can accept myself for that, but also help others accept this new place that I am in as well. So for any of you ladies that are out there that are listening, who are very much in this time of transition, I highly recommend that you listen to this episode in its entirety, because I promise you when you walk away, you're going to have the ability to really reflect on who you were and think about who you would like to become. Today, we are diving into some topics that I think are so incredibly important. One being honoring our past accomplishments, but also recognizing sometimes in life that who we are today isn't necessarily who we want to be going forward, or we're naturally coming into a time of our lives when we have a lot of change. So, Suzanne, I'm really excited to get your insight and some of those lessons that you've learned with times of transition, but still honoring who you were before.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie. This is so fun.
Let's start with a little bit about who you are in this moment today so that we can give people a little bit of context for our conversation, because they're going to be like, so why are we talking about honoring our past selves or embracing these transitions?
Oh, perfect. By the time you're in your 60s, you've been a lot of places. They call it a portfolio career now when you have a lot of different things going on. I always called mine an ADD career. So I'm really, really happy to have that portfolio. It sounds more important. But I've done a lot of things, from selling real estate to owning and operating a fitness studio to a lot of high-tech recruiting. So when you have a transition, when, say, you get laid off from a recruiting position, you take a look and say, what's next? It's like, take a look at what your strengths were and what were those things you did well, so you can repackage yourself and go out there and change it up. Do what you really want. And each time you're doing something that you like a little better, which is wonderful. And when I went back into coaching in 2017 or 18, I really niched in transitions, because I took a look and I'm like, God, everybody freaks out. For the most part, as humans, we don't like transitions. We don't like limbo. We don't like the liminal space. We just, wah! And typically they're caused either by something we created, a change we created, like, say, getting married or taking on a new job, or they were created from something that happened to us. Like, gosh, it could even be a death. It could be losing a job. So I realized it was such a difficult time for people. And you and I, before we got on this call, were talking about actually a California fire right now, which is super bizarre this time of year. That was where I first noticed people freaking out during change. Was my folks lost their house in a fire, and there was 3,200 homes. And this was 30 years ago. So whole neighborhood was gone and then some. And I watched how differently people reacted to this, I mean, disaster, terrible thing that happened to them. But just the resiliency level was so different. I found it totally fascinating. I thought, what makes some people literally curl up and die when they're stressed out? And other people just kind of look forward and march forward and move through it. So that was my original look into any of William Bridges' work on transitions. And transitions happen to us all the time. The more resilient we are, the more coping mechanisms and skills we have to work through them, the way better life is. And to have a coach go through it with you and kind of lock arms with you and guide you through it and remind you of your greatness along the way really, really helps.
So I'm curious, and this might be more of a, I guess, a multifaceted question, but in your personal life, with all of these transitions, would you have said you had the type of personality that was just open to those transitions occurring? And so you were naturally the type of person to just embrace them? Or would you say that maybe the harder one was the first one, but then as you started to see some of the benefit of embracing those transitions, all of a sudden you learned those lessons and you very quickly adapted?
That's a good one. You know what? I probably started being the less adaptable one and learned by taking a look, kind of looking under the hood at why do I freak out when something changes on me? And I definitely do like to change things up. So I hope that means that's a good sign that I can handle change. But also change and transition are both kind of different things. Like a change can happen or you can create a change. Transition is your process through it. So learning that transition is a process really helps. And it's helped me when I remember first hearing, and it sounds so simple. It's kind of ridiculous now, but a new beginning can't happen without an ending first. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that's bizarrely simple and prophetic, but wow, there was an ending. So,
Mm.
I think I had a mom that was like totally a stiff upper lip, you just march on type of person. So the flip side to that is too, you kind of have to feel your feels about it. You can't just go through something horrific or a death in the family and just march on. That was kind of the 50s mentality or more of my parents' generation, which was the greatest generation, was just keep a stiff upper lip. And they had to learn that, they went through the war.
Yeah.
They had to just march on and move forward. But sometimes holding that kind of pain isn't the best thing to do either. So I talk a lot with my clients about processing what ended. And sometimes it might even need a therapist because I'm not a therapist. But otherwise, what I'll do as a coach is take them through an exercise where they'll really honor their ending. They'll honor whatever ended. And in my case, I work with so many retirees or new retirees. I have them take a look at what they did. Look at that 40-year, 50-year span. Look what you pulled off. Look at your greatness. Look at your badassery. And really, sometimes they write a letter. Sometimes they create a ritual. I think we're like low on rituals in Western society, but really ritualize that ending and honor yourself and give yourself some kudos, and pats on the back, and invite people in to honor you and love you. And then it makes moving on more of a smooth transition when you can really take a look and honor. We all tend to just go racing through things. So I absolutely love when people will stop and just say, dang, I pulled off a lot, raised family. Look at you creating a whole business and bringing others along the way in your business. I mean, that's brilliant. It's just brilliant.
Well, and I think too, sometimes people might get a little lost in why do you even need to think about what you did? You have all these things to look forward to. Like I can think for myself, the number of people that are like, oh, I'm so excited to do this and when I retire, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so do you think some of it is that people get caught up in feeling like I'm supposed to only be excited about this new thing, that for me to talk about the hard things of what I'm letting go isn't necessary, or it's kind of strange to even feel like I need to mourn who that person was because I should be really excited that now I'm free of a job finally for the first time in 40 to 50 years or whatever,
It's almost like survivor's guilt, huh? There
Yeah.
is that. You're supposed to be happy about retirement, right? And most people, they save their whole life. So if they have the financial means, they don't even feel like they have the right to complain if their retirement isn't perfect, right? Because they're thinking that other people are thinking, oh, so you have enough money, you're all comfortable and you're complaining to me. It's not that there's always something to complain about in retirement or something that's not working out well. But often it's a little more of a shock to the system than people think. They think, okay, I'm going to be done with work Friday, Monday, yay. And then the reality is they're in the house. Maybe they planned a few things for the day, or they have set themselves up for, say, babysitting the grandkids or something. But maybe whatever they planned and all those trips aren't exactly what they're meant to be or cut out to be, or they realize there's all this time in between. And it's like, now what? It's a transition. It just takes time to sink into. I don't talk to many people who said, oh, yeah, it was just exactly how I planned. It was all woohoo, perfect. It really helps to make a bit of a plan for that first year. But I also, on the flip side, and it depends on the person, say, what about giving yourself a gap year? You could just take time to figure it out. So you have your planners that want to plan now, okay, Monday, I'm going to be at the gym. I'm going to da 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 da. And even that can kind of backfire because now what? I'm doing the things I said I was going to do. So we need a purpose. We really work on figuring out your next steps, figuring out your purpose. So there's many different versions. We have our list makers and we have our, just wait and see how it goes. And then they're completely underplanned and freaking out and drinking too much or eating too much. So it just helps to really wrap your head around it years in advance. Really wrap your head around it. See what's non-negotiable. See what you need to do. See what are things you would like to do, have to do, and go from there. And I always say, if you don't plan a little bit, somebody else will plan your time for you. So be careful. Might be a full-time babysitter, which is great if that's what you like.
Yeah, if that's fulfilling, then that's okay. But if you're falling into that just by default, then
exactly,
that's probably not going to lead to the best outcome for you.
Right. And make sure that those around you respect your time because it's still your time.
What you're saying resonates with me so much. I'm years from retirement, but leaving education after 16 years, it was a big identity shift for me. And I think there were a lot of people that thought it's just going to be this perfect thing. You get to set your schedule. You get to take your daughter to school whenever you want. You get to take appointments in the middle of the day. You get to do all these things. And it was always just the positive, the positive, the positive. And I never felt like, especially in the first year, I'm 2 years out now, but to your point, I never really felt like I could be honest with anybody about what I was struggling with. Because yes, for as many positives as there were that came out of it, there were also things that were really unexpected. Like I left this really social profession, which people would feel in retirement too, where you have colleagues that you're making connections with and you're hearing other people's stories and you feel like you have all these friends. And all of a sudden I went to working by myself, or again, in the case of retirement, now you're alone in your house and it's crickets and you're just, you're like, where's my sounding board?
I'm so glad you brought that up. It is such a huge part of it. And especially for people in their 60s, now they're not around the younger generations anymore. The biggest thing I've heard they miss is being around younger people. It's like, oh, now I'm just around people my age because that's who you tend to plan social things with, but you're not kind of forced, so to speak, to be around all the other generations, which is what keeps you relevant and excited and exciting and alive, Yeah. So keeping that in mind is really important, that whole social thing. There is so much you can do to build your social life. And I always ask people, if you've been neglecting that because you've been so busy working and building this career and saving the money, and so often people have their family and their work, but not a lot of time to nurture friendships. So that's something to go back to. Make sure you talk to those that you love and you want to keep into your life and let them know they're important, as well as it's really okay to go out and meet new friends. I know so many people who are afraid of that. They think, oh, well, I'm older. I won't find people like me. You will. Meetup groups are the huge thing. So I did that when I moved to a new area. I joined meetup groups for hiking, just whatever you're interested in, you're going to meet like-minded people.
It could be pickleball, it could be coffee. And it is so interesting when you think like, oh, well, it's going to be so hard to find people that are like me or no one else is in my shoes. But if you're sitting there thinking those things, there's certainly somebody else out there who is also thinking the same thing, who's wanting connections. And once you find community, and I found it through this podcast, and then I joined some groups of women who are also entrepreneurs who work from home, it is a game changer mentally because all of a sudden now you've built community in a different way. way. And going back to your comment about finding
Hmm.
your purpose can also come out of building a community, right? Like
Right.
you form your own identity within this new community, and that can then drive whatever this new purpose is going to be. You might rise as the person who's planning some social stuff for this community, or you might be the person
Hmm.
that people want to come to talk to about things because you're a good listener or whatever. It can
Right.
bring about that purpose that you're seeking because you've made the connections.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I've joined quite a few communities to where I've even taken leadership roles and whatnot. That's a really quick way to get to know people. And you'll
Mm,
know when there's people that are right up your alley. And it's usually like 1 out of 20 or 2 out of 20 that are really going to be people you call for coffee and whatnot. But it's so worth it. It's so worth it to have those people, those
mhm.
connections.
But you have to go out and find that because otherwise you feel like you're living your life in a silo.
Right.
Um,
Like you said, you had to go find it and create it. And I
mhm,
think the difference with older people is they think, well, now that I'm older, I'm not going to find people like me, but that's just not true.
mhm.
We
No.
all have our peeps. We all
Yeah.
do. And you know what? There's a lot of beauty in being with people who aren't exactly like you. That's where you're going
Mhm.
to learn the most. So be
Yep.
open. I
Yeah.
remember going through this with my dad when he was, I think, 86 or 87. We lost my mom, and trying to talk him to go to a grief counseling, to a hospice group for counseling was, yeah, oh God, he just thought, no, those people are exactly you right now. And we didn't know what it was like to lose a spouse. We knew what it was like
Mhm.
to lose a mom. So we urged him because it was just a little relief for us too. So people have to keep in mind, get out there and stay social. Your kids don't want you counting on them the whole time. And so my dad ended up with, again, lifelong friends. He made it another 7 years and he had good friends from that group. It's never too
Mhm.
late.
Yeah. I know that you also have to, with your current relationships, be ready to navigate that journey of that friendship changing. So my best friend and I taught together, like we had a actual class that we taught together with kids that just needed additional support. And we taught together for 13 years. And I knew that in leaving education, that our friendship was going to change because although we were best friends and we obviously saw each other a lot outside of school, she is now experiencing things on a day to day basis that I'm not a part of. And I'm experiencing things on a day to day basis that she's not a part of. So even as much as you're also looking toward new relationships, I'm sure that you also have conversations with people too about how to have people accept you for the new you at the
Aw,
same time, right?
that's a really good point. That's very intricate and intimate, actually. Imagine having those conversations before. I wouldn't think about it. And now that you
Mhm.
say that, I'm going to think about it more. But before you leave a situation, just saying to somebody, I would love to keep in touch with you. Could we meet for coffee once in a while if that's possible to keep those connections? I know for fact some recent coachees of mine are really suffering, missing the people, and the people move on. It's hard. It's like they just move on without you, and that's kind of a shock sometimes if you've been somewhere a
Mhm.
long time. I don't know if you felt that at all leaving education, and it's time to redesign relationships. Have you talked to your friend
Mhm.
about that?
Yeah, so my best friend and I are very, very open, and we're
Oh,
both
that's
also
nice.
very insightful people too. Like we do a
Mhm.
lot of our own self-analysis and talk to each other about what we're diagnosing ourselves with, in
I
terms
so
of
hear
like,
you.
ooh, you know what I mean? Like you have that friend where it's like you could
Uh,
be so overly honest with them because you're like, I'm a
mhm.
mess right now, and here's the 5 reasons why,
Yes.
whatever. So she and I have navigated it not perfectly. We've had some hard conversations when we recognize like, ooh, we're not being intentional enough. So we went from seeing each other every day to seeing each other once a month. And that's not enough. That's
Mm.
making us feel really disconnected from each other.
Mhm.
Now, that is a very unique relationship, right? Like she and I can say that to each other without it being a threatening situation where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, like I feel like you're attacking me or that like I'm taking it on myself that I did something wrong. But what I would say is with some other friendships that I had in education, I shed a lot of tears over feeling like, was I making up those relationships in my head? Was I thinking that those were stronger than they actually
Mm.
were? Because now that I'm not at school anymore, they're basically non existent. And I was doing a lot of like self blame, like, well, I chose to leave. I chose to
Mm,
go do something different. And so I can't blame them for just being caught up in their lives and whatever. But then also being just incredibly sad over the loss of that relationship. So I haven't talked with a lot of them where those relationships have completely disappeared. So I'm subbing a little more this year. And so I'm
mm,
actually crossing their paths a little more often. And so it's helped me at least feel like, okay, I see them when I see them. And my relationship with them now is not a reflection on what that relationship actually was when I did teach. It's just a matter of there was so much time built into that relationship through the nature of our job that when you remove that, it's not that we didn't have that connection. It's just that we don't have that time in common anymore. And therefore, everybody has to make choices about where they spend their time. And that's just a reality. We all only have so much time and so many relationships that we can nurture without it being built into our day already, you know?
absolutely. Absolutely. And you know how hard teachers are worked. They don't have a lot of time. I mean,
Mm-mm.
my goodness. I remember my mom saying when I got married back when I was 23 years old, she said, we were looking at the invite list, trying to keep it down. And I had this huge work table. And she said, ask yourself, when you don't work there, will you still be friends with that person? That was a big question to ask. In other words, she was like, I don't want to have to pay for this many meals. But it was a really good question. And I always defer to that. Like, would this person be in my life if we didn't have this connection?
Mhm.
That's a big question. If not,
Yeah.
then it really is
Mhm.
just situational,
Yes.
which
Yes.
is kind of tough sometimes because you really like people. But you know what? We don't have time for everybody. We
No.
just simply don't. We can love
Mhm.
and respect them, but we don't
Yep.
always have time.
Just like there are times and seasons in our lives that we are certain people or need to live our lives certain ways, friendships are literally no different. There's a time and a season for different relationships, and you can honor that season of that friendship and say it's different now and it doesn't make it less, it's just different. I don't remember where I heard it, but it was someone talking about honoring the different women that we've been before.
Mhm. Ooh, that's
And
beautiful.
right?
Yeah.
And I kind of have had to choose to look at friendships the same way. I honor them. I
Mhm.
love them for what they were in that season, and they're different now, and that's okay because it also opens up space and capacity for something different,
Mhm.
a different type of friendship or other connections elsewhere.
Right. And it's
Mhm.
also, you know what? It's not personal. And that's one thing we have to remove ourselves from being insulted at all. And
Mhm.
we are sensitive human beings, just the way it goes. But sometimes you think, geez, I would have kept that friendship up. I wonder why they don't want to. But you never know. They could be thinking the same thing.
Yeah,
And they're probably
right.
really happy to see you when you show up. And
Yeah,
that kind of says it all, right?
right, exactly. If they're a little grumpy when you're showing up, then maybe you're like,
Yeah.
"Ooh, I should get out this
No,
way."
not her
I
again.
I
Hope
I
she didn't
know.
come back. Is that Julie?
Yeah.
No, but you know what? You're really making me think I need to even dive deeper into the
Mm,
relationship conversation with my clients and friends because so many of my friends are going through the same thing right now. It is relationships. You know, when I first decided to niche on retirement, it was because I would sit with peers, and dinner tables, and whatnot, and they are always somewhat freaked out. They would talk about retirement and their eyes would go wide, and then they'd be like, "Ugh." And you know what? I do want to touch on this a little bit too. The fact that women have a bit of a different challenge on a couple different levels socially. They were that business card and they had to work 10 times as hard for that title, that
mhm,
C-suite, wherever they landed. And they're used to that speed. They're used to that amount of reverence because at this point now, the C's are parting when they walk into a room or they pop on a Zoom call. They're very well respected. Now, for the most part, once you hit a certain age as a woman, and I hate to say this, but it's a little bit true, is you're kind of ignored. You're not really seen in society. And it's just systemic. It's the way it is. So holding that business card, they're seen. Once they walk out of that office, there's going to be a complete identity shift. Whereas quite often men are seen just walking down the street, right? They garner a certain amount of respect walking in a room. We had to earn that and show the business card to get the respect. Now we're losing that whole layer. And that's a whole identity thing. We really have to work on being absolutely sure of who we are as people, honoring ourselves. That's another reason why I have them do that exercise of honoring their whole career. I mean, go through it. Look what you did. You made it to 9 months and 1 day pregnant in this office. I mean, the things you pulled off are mind boggling if you really think about it. So that's why I want them to really dive into their greatness, because you got to see just what an incredible soul you are so you can take that intrinsic value and move forward with it. And it's so important. And some of them panic at the thought. Oh, I remember one of them saying, I don't want to be alone with my husband every day. And I thought, well, that's sad, but it's real for her. So
Yeah.
maybe a therapist is in order. Isn't there a new trend? They call it the silver divorce, where divorces over 50 are way up. So might as well have that conversation sooner than later.
Well, when you remove the busyness of a
Yes.
job
Oh my
and
gosh,
all of a
yes.
sudden you are together all the time, it is rediscovering in a lot of different ways who you are as individuals now and who you want to be as a couple,
And what
because
you want to
now your
do.
time isn't right,
Mhm.
exactly. And do you even still have the same interests?
Right.
And yeah, want to spend your time doing those things. But I really like what you said about your value. I was listening to a podcast and someone was on there talking about when somebody asks you, what do you do? What do we often say, right? We
Mhm.
say our job. Our job is a major, major part of who we are and where we place value on the person that we are, the accomplishments that we've made. And he said, why isn't it when someone says, what do you do? Well, I love to do snowboarding. I love to crochet. I love to podcast. I love to like all these other
Mhm.
passions and things that we have about our lives come second
Right.
oftentimes to our job. And to your point, you have to shift where you're getting that intrinsic value from,
Mhm.
because your job was only ever meant to be one aspect of who you were. It was never meant
Exactly.
to be fully who you are, but culturally,
Mhm.
become our job. And even to this day, I struggle leaving teaching 2 years ago to say, I'm a former teacher. Like saying those words out loud make me want to vomit because it was so much a part of who I was. Like
Mhm.
it's so ingrained in my identity that to say I'm a former anything is really challenging. But if I really dig into that, it's like, why? Well, it's a job that I could say and have pride in because other people were like, wow, you were a teacher. Oh, wow, you taught middle school, right? There's so much that comes with that. And so you have to see your value in a broader way.
And it is absurd that people say, "What do you do?" In other words, they're saying, "How do you make money?" That's a bizarre question. I was taught not to talk about those things. It's a really bizarre question. I started years ago answering that in different ways. Just, well,
Mhm.
today I actually went to the gym and I
There
have
you
2
go.
really 2 crazy kids and blah, blah, blah. And they just kinda look at you like, "Oh, you must not have a job." And, "Oh, do you wanna know what I do for money? Okay."
Yeah. I love that you're already doing that because when I heard somebody say that, I had never thought
How
about that.
funny.
That just seems so automatic to just be like, "Well, of course you just say what you do." Then
Depends on my
to your
mood.
point, it is so strange, but I think we should toss that back at people more.
So what's interesting is the definition of teacher, because it sure sounds to me that you're still a teacher. You're teaching people how to do Airbnbs, how to buy property, how to
Yes.
finance property. You're teaching people how to podcast. You're
Yeah.
teaching people every time you open your mouth.
Yes.
You're very wise.
I'm an educator
Mm.
through and through, I'm gonna have to ruminate on that.
I went from teaching kids to teaching adults.
Yeah.
Teaching kids who had an excuse to be crazy to teaching
Yeah.
adults who just are.
Who just are, right? Okay, so it's crazy how fast these conversations go.
I've so enjoyed my time with you.
I've enjoyed my time with you as well. Where is the best place for someone to find you if they were wanting to reach out to have more of these conversations?
My website is the best place. You can book an appointment, a free look-see appointment, look under the hood appointment right there. It's SuzanneCampi.com. So it's SuzanneCampi.com. It's my website. I'm also the same name on LinkedIn. I'm just scratching the surface of any Insta thing, but I'm a little more on LinkedIn and my website says it all.
Perfect. And I'll be sure to link that in the show notes too. And thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Julie. Bye.
Thanks for wandering with me today. If you were inspired by this episode and think it would ignite a spark in a friend, don't hesitate to share. And if you're craving more from the Wander Mode community, hop on over to Instagram at WanderModeCo. Meet you in the next episode, and until then, wander on.